There are moments in music history when silence speaks louder than any guitar solo, and Randy Meisner's death created one of those moments. The man whose angelic high notes lifted the Eagles to global legend, the voice behind Take It to the Limit. The gentle soul who helped build one of the greatest bands on earth, spent decades carrying a truth he'd never fully spoke. And now, after Randy's passing, one of the only people who witnessed the entire rise and fallout from the inside Bernie Leadon has finally broken his silence. What he revealed confirms what fans have whispered about for years. The real reason Randy Meisner was pushed out of the band he helped create. Not the public story, not the rumors, but what truly happened behind the closed doors. Backstage fights, fragile egos, and a pressure that crushed one of rock's softest spirits. This is the truth we were never supposed to hear. Until now, Leadon finally confirmed what fans had whispered about for decades. Randy Meisner didn't walk away because he was tired. He was quietly pushed out of a growing power struggle inside the Eagles. What the world saw as a gentle exit was, in truth, the result of politics, ego, and decisions made behind closed doors. This video uncovers that real story, the one that lived backstage, in dressing rooms thick with tension, and in the silent distance that eventually grew between two friends who once stood side by side on the same stage in 1971. For musicians who had spent years backing Linda Ronstadt stepped away to build something of their own, the Eagles, Randy Meisner took charge of the bass and delivered soaring lead vocals. Bernie Leadon brought the soul of bluegrass with his banjo and acoustic guitar. Glenn Frey and Don Henley stepped forward as the band's dominant songwriters and strategists. Together, they built a brand new sound, a perfect blend of California rock, warmth, and old-school country roots. Something soft, honest, and instantly recognizable. From the very first album, Meisner proved he wasn't just a bassist. He was the quiet engine of the band, anchoring the harmonies and giving emotional depth to tracks like Take the Devil. Most of us are sad and trying. He didn't crave the spotlight, didn't fight for control, didn't chase fame. He just played, recorded, and kept the music steady behind the scenes. Meisner and Leadon were the closest match. They shared a belief in simplicity, organic instrumentation, and staying true to the band's early roots. Frey and Henley, on the other hand, were beginning to push the Eagles toward a bigger, sharper, more commercial rock identity. As that creative divide widened, so did the internal hierarchy. Meisner chose silence, avoiding conflict. Leadon pushed back gently but remained cooperative. Meanwhile, Frey and Henley began taking control of everything: the set list, the vocal assignments, the sound direction, even the band's public image. Key meetings took place without Meisner or Leadon present, and decisions were often made before they even entered the room. By the time the second album, Desperado, arrived, the shift was undeniable. Leadon and Meisner were still essential to the band's core sound, but their songwriting contributions had quietly shrunk. Meisner moved more and more from lead vocals to background harmonies, a change he didn't argue about, but one that slowly pushed him out of the creative center. As Leadon later explained, Randy never demanded anything. He just wanted to play the right parts and do the job well. But in a band where control meant survival, that humility became the very thing that left him exposed, silent, overlooked, and slowly edged out of the world he had helped build. Randy Meisner's quiet exit from the Eagles marked the end of an era, not because he drifted away, but because he was pushed out of a storm that had been building around him for years. Bernie Leadon, who watched the internal dynamic long before most fans even knew there was trouble, revealed that Meisner's departure wasn't a matter of burnout or weakness. It was the direct result of a power structure that suffocated the very spirit that once made the Eagles unique. He explained that Randy was the heart of the original sound, the most stable and technically precise musician in the group, but also the most vulnerable because he simply never fought back. In the Eagles' early days, he and Leadon shared a bond built on musical purity, the desire to keep the band rooted in the warm simplicity of country rock. But when the band exploded into global fame, that dynamic shifted dramatically. Glenn Frey and Don Henley became the dominant force, shaping every major decision from songwriting hierarchies to touring demands. While Meisner's voice slowly faded from the spotlight, his songs, once an essential part of the band's soul, were pushed to the edges. His ideas rarely made it into the final cuts. Meetings took place without him, and even when he remained quiet, his silence was mislabeled as a lack of drive rather than what it truly was: deep respect for the band. He helped build. As the differences grew, Meisner found himself increasingly isolated. The pressures of fame were suffocating for a man who had never wanted the spotlight in the first place. Leadon later said that Randy absorbed more emotional weight than anyone, and because he didn't push back, he became the easiest member to over. When Leadon left in 1975, Meisner lost the only person who understood that original vision. And from that moment forward, the Eagles became a very different animal. The newer, harder, more commercial sound overshadowed Randy's gentle ballads and subtle harmonies, leaving him feeling like a guest in the very band he could. Even though he contributed to major albums like One of These Nights and Hotel California, his status continued to shrink, and he was treated more like a background piece than a foundational voice. Behind closed doors, Frey and Henley dominated rehearsals, studio sessions, and business decisions. Randy showed up, played flawlessly, and stayed quiet, but his quietness was exactly what allowed the internal pressure to crush him. The breaking point came on the Hotel California tour, a grueling stretch of back-to-back performances that drained Meisner physically and emotionally. His signature song, Take It to the Limit, had become the emotional peak of every show, but the song's high final note was brutal for a man battling exhaustion, stomach ulcers, and months of unrelenting travel. One night in Knoxville, Meisner simply didn't have the strength to perform it. He asked to rotate the encore, a small request for a man suffering silently. But Glenn Frey refused, insisting that the crowd expected Randy's high note and demanding he go out anyway. That confrontation exploded backstage into one of the most infamous fights in the band's history, a physical clash fueled by months of resentment, pressure, and exhaustion. Crew members recalled seeing Randy in tears afterward, realizing that the music he once loved had turned into a battlefield. That moment was the final crack in a long fracturing foundation. Shortly afterward, Randy Meisner left the Eagles not because he wanted to quit, but because he could no longer survive the emotional warfare that had become part of daily life in the band. Decades later, Leadon confirmed it plainly. Randy didn't walk away, he was driven out. After leaving, Meisner stepped into a life of quiet anonymity, avoiding the spotlight that had betrayed him. While Frey and Henley shaped the Eagles into one of the biggest bands of all time, Randy retreated to small venues, gentle music, and the kind of peaceful life he had always wanted. Leadon remembered him with deep sadness. Randy just wanted to play. He never wanted the fight. And now, after Meisner's death, Leadon's final revelation adds the emotional truth fans always felt but never heard. Spoken aloud, Randy Meisner wasn't a weak link, he was the fragile heart of the Eagles, a man pushed aside by the very machine he helped build. His fall wasn't a failure. It was a tragedy born from silence, pressure, and the cost of brilliance inside a band, where power mattered more than harmony. After his departure from the Eagles in 1977, Randy Meisner slipped into a life far removed from the spotlight he had once helped create. There were no more band meetings, no more grueling cross-country tours, and no more nights when he was pressured to deliver high-volume encores while fighting exhaustion. Yet stepping away from the stage did not bring him the peace many assumed. Meisner continued making music for a while as a solo artist, and his album One More Song offered a glimpse of what could have been. Hearts on Fire earned him some well-deserved recognition, but nothing matched the towering success he experienced during the Eagles' prime. Slowly, Randy began retreating from anything resembling public life. For nearly 3 decades, he avoided the media almost entirely, only granting the occasional interview, short, guarded, and always steering away from painful memories of the band. California was home for a time, but eventually he returned to Nebraska, the place where his story began, choosing a life anchored in simplicity rather than fame. Those who remained close to him say that Randy's withdrawal was not bitterness, it was self-protection. Leadon was one of the few who continued to keep in touch, exchanging letters, stories, and the occasional demo. Leadon later revealed that Randy never stopped writing music. He simply chose to keep it private. Randy was still creating until the end, Leadon said. He just didn't want to release it. In the 1980s, Meisner joined Black Tie with Jimmy Griffin and Billy Swan, a quiet, low-key project far from the commercial spotlight but rich in harmonies and musicianship. Even in obscurity, Randy's voice had lost none of its magic. In his personal life, he found stability with Lorraine, whom he married in 1981. The couple lived quietly, avoiding publicity and devoting themselves to one another as the years passed. But life brought challenges of its own. In 2016, Randy suffered a severe fall at home, resulting in a traumatic brain injury that required extended hospitalization. Those close to him said the injury forever changed the rhythm of his final years. Through it all, Randy remained gentle, soft-spoken, and deeply private, the same man he had always been. Only now, far from the industry that once relied on his voice to define an era. Randy Meisner's fall in 2016 marked the point where his world fully closed off from everything he once knew. After the traumatic brain injury, his quiet life became even more silent. The man whose voice once carried stadiums now struggled simply to breathe. Doctors soon diagnosed him with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, a progressive illness that slowly stole the strength from his lungs. The same lungs that had created some of the most haunting harmonies in American rock. For years, he lived in near-total isolation, cared for lovingly by his wife Lorraine. Friends said he rarely spoke about the Eagles, not out of bitterness but out of exhaustion. He chose peace over the noise of old memories. It was during these final years that the world quietly forgot him. No interviews, no tributes, no red carpets. Just a man trying to hold on to what little life he had left. On July 26, 2023, Randy Meisner passed away in Los Angeles at the age of 77. There were no grand public statements from the surviving band members, no nationwide memorial, no emotional reunion. His exit was quiet, almost too quiet for a man who had shaped one of the greatest rock bands of all time. Only a brief confirmation from the family marked the end of Randy's story. It seemed once again that silence had followed him to the end. But just days later, that silence finally broke. Bernie Leadon stepped forward, not as a former Eagle, not as a spokesman, but as the last man willing to speak the truth. In a live interview with no edits and no studio polish, he said the words fans had suspected for decades but had never heard from anyone inside the band. Leadon revealed that Randy Meisner had not simply been tired or ready to move on, as the official story claimed. He had been pressured, cornered, and pushed out by a system that valued profit, power, and control more than the mental well-being of one of its founding members. Leadon admitted that the environment had broken Randy long before Knoxville. He wasn't protected, Leadon said quietly. He was overwhelmed, and instead of helping him, the pressure just kept building. His silence was taken as weakness. It wasn't weakness, it was the way he survived. For the first time, someone from the inside confirmed that Meisner repeatedly asked for breaks, begged for rest, and tried to step away for the sake of his mental health, but his pleas were ignored. The Knoxville incident, long treated as an isolated meltdown, was actually the final spark of a fire that had been burning for years. Leadon's words hit fans like a shockwave. It was the confession no one expected and the truth Randy had never been able to speak for himself. Shortly after the interview, Bernie Leadon released a single titled Too Many Memories, followed by his long-awaited album Too Late to Be Cool. Though the songs never mention a name, the message is unmistakable, nostalgic, reflective, full of unresolved ghosts. Listeners instantly recognized the emotional undertones. This was Bernie's quiet tribute to Randy Meisner, the friend who had been lost to history long before he was lost to time. When asked directly whether the album was for Randy, Leadon simply said, "Those who need to understand will understand," was the closest thing Randy Meisner ever received to a public apology. A final acknowledgement, a voice speaking the truth on behalf of a man who never raised his own. And in that moment, the world finally saw Randy Meisner for who he truly was, not the quiet one, not the replaceable one, not the forgotten eagle, but the soul of a band that soared because he carried its harmony. Randy Meisner's life, when viewed from beginning to end, becomes the story of a man who never chased the spotlight yet shaped one of the greatest American bands ever formed. He didn't fight for control, didn't demand credit, didn't seek applause. He simply showed up, played his heart out, and held the entire sound together with a quiet brilliance that few ever recognized. Even after his departure, his fingerprints remained on the Eagles' legacy. Every soaring harmony, every emotional ballad, every moment of vulnerability in their music carried a trace of his voice, his patience, his steadiness. And yet, Meisner's contribution was the one most easily forgotten. Fame is loud, but Randy was soft-spoken. History remembers the loud ones first. But those who stood beside him, the musicians who saw the truth up close, never forgot. Bernie Leadon's late-life tribute wasn't just a confession, it was a correction, a restoration of the truth that had been buried under decades of silence, ego, and the polished mythology of rock and roll. By breaking his silence, Leadon didn't just honor Meisner, he rewrote the narrative. He confirmed that the gentle, private, soft-spoken man who sang "Take It to the Limit" with a voice that could break open the sky was not weak. He was overwhelmed, exhausted, and unprotected in a world that demanded more than he could give. Leadon's words finally gave Randy Meisner what the industry never did: justice, dignity, acknowledgement, and perhaps most importantly, a farewell worthy of a founding member. Through new songs like Too Many Memories, Leadon offered the kind of tribute only a friend could give: raw, unfiltered, honest. He carried Randy's spirit into music one last time, ensuring he would not vanish into the shadows the way fame had once allowed. Today, fans are rediscovering Meisner with fresh eyes, not just as the other guy in the Eagles, but as the voice behind some of their most emotional moments, the man whose harmonies lifted Glenn Frey's melodies, whose bass rooted Henley's storytelling, whose humility kept chaos from collapsing the band's early years. His absence proved what his presence had quietly held together. Randy Meisner never wanted glory. He wanted peace, music, and the freedom to perform without being pushed beyond his limit. And now, at last, after his passing, the truth has stepped into the light thanks to the only bandmate brave enough to speak it aloud. Randy's legacy was never meant to fade. It was simply waiting for the right voice to bring it back. If this story changed the way you see Randy Meisner, share your thoughts below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with us for more untold stories from behind the music where legends rise, fall, and are finally remembered with the truth they always deserved.